be at home and spend Memorial Day with your friends here at First Methodist and join us for worship today. I read for our text from the Gospel of John, the 14th chapter, the 23rd through the 29th verses. Jesus replied, "Anyone who loves me will obey my teaching. My Father will love them, and we will come to them and make our home with them. Anyone who does not love me will not obey my teaching. These words you hear are not my own. They belong to the Father who sent me. All this I've spoken while still with you. But the Advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you all things and remind you of everything I've said to you. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not let them be afraid. You heard me say, I'm going away, and I'm coming back to you. If you loved me, you would be glad that I'm going to the Father, for the Father is greater than I. I have told you now before it happens, so that when it does happen, you will believe." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Jesus has told his disciples that he is going away. It's a difficult time for them. As a matter of fact, he has told them that he is going to be handed over to the authorities, that he's going to be crucified, that he's going to be raised from the dead. They have not believed it. They have not been sure of it at all, but now they know he is going away. And this is a time when he's trying to console them, because he's saying, even though I'm going away, I will come back. But unless I go away, the Advocate will not come to you. It's a painful time of transition for the disciples. If you look at the Gospels, the disciples before Jesus' death and resurrection seem to be just sort of bumbling around. They hardly know what they're doing from time to time. And sometimes, some of the Gospels even make them look kind of like a joke. After Jesus' death and resurrection, everything changes. All of a sudden, these disciples become powerful men. They seem to be in tune with the gospel and with what God is doing within the world. All of a sudden, everything changes. In that little interval of transition between being disciples and becoming apostles, something happens. It is a painful time, but in a sense, it is a powerful time. We all face transitions in life, don't we? As a matter of fact, life is about transitions, moving from one stage to the other. Someone has described our lives as being like individual chapters in which you close one chapter and open another chapter, and close another chapter and open another one. The period from childhood to adolescence, the period from adolescence to adulthood, the time when you are married, your time of vocation, your time of retirement, even our death, different chapters in our lives, changes that we have to undergo. Transitions, beginnings, and endings. Before you open a new door, you also have to close another door. Jesus is saying that there are certain kinds of prerequisites for the coming of the Spirit, for God's presence with you in your lives, for Christ's continued presence with us. There are certain kinds of requirements that have to be met before that can happen. And Jesus said one of them is that I must go away. You must end this relationship in order to start this new relationship. And the teachings that I have given you are those things that will enable you to move from one to the other successfully. I had the privilege to study under a man that I thought of as not only a magnificent preacher, but also a wonderful human being. Fred Craddock was my teacher of homiletics at Emory. And one day when I was in his office, I asked Fred, I said, Fred, walk me through exactly how you go about preparing a sermon. And he said something like this. He said, well, I spend a good deal of time with the text and take a lot of notes about the text and look for a word or a phrase that sort of comes out of the text that both does respect to that text and also says something to the people I'm going to be speaking to. And he said, I form that into a sentence that says what I want to say. And then out of that sentence, I draw about 5 different parts of the sermon. And then he said, I just spend a lot of time looking at the ceiling as I think through each of those parts of the sermon and try to think through how they come alive in images and in smells and in life's experiences. And he said, I try to identify with each one and get the feel for each one of those parts so that I can put them in the proper order so that one builds on the next and the next and the next. And then he said, and then I write down and memorize the 2 or 3 sentences that transition one section to the other. He said, I learned those and I memorized them because those transitions are what will hold the whole thing together. They are the most important. Well, it's true in life, isn't it? The way we transition from one stage, one chapter, go through one door into another world in our life is the most important part. If you do it well, the next world will be better. If you do it poorly, the next world is going to be painful. Our lives are filled with transitions that we must handle and handle well. I remember a friend who had been a distinguished professor and actually a dean of a rather large university up north before moving to the south, telling me one day, a man with an absolutely brilliant mind. He said to me, the hardest day of my life was the day that they told me about mandatory retirement. He said, I was 70 years old, and he said, my whole life had been centered around teaching and watching students come alive in the classroom and honing my mind for critical thinking and teaching others to do that. He said, that had been my life, and I wasn't going to get to do that anymore. He said it was the hardest thing he ever did, that transition from teaching into retirement. I remember a mom who told me about the difficulty she had when her youngest son, her oldest son, graduated from high school and went away to college. She said that she had enjoyed so much those times as taking him places and being so proud of him and doing things with him and sharing life with him, and now he was going to be gone, and she was just beside herself. I remember that myself. My oldest son was the one who would come into the study and interrupt Dad. Dad was always in the study while everybody else was watching television or doing something else. Dad was reading or writing or working on something for the church or whatever he was doing. I was in there in the study, and the oldest son, who now is a pastor, would come in and hang his hang his leg over the chair, and make Dad put his book down. Talk for a while. Visit, share a little bit. And I guess for a long time I thought that was kind of an interruption until he went away to college, and all of a sudden I missed that. It was a dark time in my life, that transition in his life. Until my youngest son decided there was something wrong with Dad, and he started coming in, hanging his leg over the and interrupting Dad. Transitions. They are hard. But doing them right and knowing how to do them right is crucial in life. The disciples were about to go through one of the most difficult transitions they would ever go through. Jesus' death and resurrection. And yet they did it so well that they turned the world we live in upside down. God did it through them, but they changed everything. So how do you go about making those transitions? What do you do? Well, one thing you do is that you have to understand what an ultimate eternal relationship is and what a temporary relationship is. And you have to learn to build your life on those permanent relationships rather than those temporary relationships. The Bible tells us about it. The Bible talks about it all the time. As a matter of fact, when I took my first course in systematic theology in school, the professor said, theology is all about understanding three relationships. Your relationship with God and your relationship with the earth, God's relationship to you and God's relationship to the earth, and how those three entities work together. You see, the only eternal relationship we have is our relationship with God. You are a child of God. That lasts forever. Your relationship with this world will come to an end. Your relationship with everybody that you know will come to an end. The fact that you are a child of God will last forever. Holding on to that relationship and making that your primary relationship is that thing that gets you through all the changes you have to make. One of our outstanding bishops years ago, this was one of our bishops in the church who sort of helped put the whole church back together when we were divided. A powerful, powerful individual of great vision and intelligence, a marvelous speaker. One day he was asked the question, Bishop, what is the most important day, or what's the greatest day in your life? And of course they thought it would be that maybe it was when he was ordained, or when he was consecrated as a bishop, or when he was part of that ceremony that put the church back together. The bishop said the greatest day in his life was the day that he was baptized. And it became symbolic that he was a child of God. The greatest day in our life is the day that we realize we have entered into a relationship with the one who created us, the one who saves us, the one who sustains our life, and the one who will be there with us and for us throughout all eternity. The second thing that gets us through transition is knowing how to pack, knowing what to leave behind, and what to carry with us. Transitions are hard. Transitions are difficult. Every Methodist preacher knows how difficult transitions are. May, for Methodist preachers, is a time of transition. At least in our family, it was always that way. Judy would end a year of school and be ready to start another year of school. My children would be out of school. They would graduate for the last time. Or we would move from one congregation to another. Now, moving for a pastor is a difficult sort of thing. You've stood at the altar with people. You've cried with people. You've come to love these folks. You've baptized their babies. You've officiated at the weddings of their daughters and their sons, and you've buried their dead. You have been with them in times of suffering and pain and in times of greatest joy, and you remember those things always, and you cherish them. And leaving those people, it's painful. It's painful. And you know, as a Methodist pastor, when you move from one church to the other, you have to leave everything behind. You can't go back. You can't meddle in the church. You don't do that. You'll ruin everything. You have to give these people that you love into someone else's care and love. You got to know what to pack, what to leave behind. You leave behind all the anger, all the frustration, all the defeats, all the sins, all the things you couldn't get done, all the things you wanted to do that just messed up, all the mistakes you made. You leave those behind. You can't carry them with you. If you carry them with you, they'll destroy you. You carry with you the joy, the hope, the promises of Christ. You carry with them the faith that you've taught. And that's what you carry in all transitions. You leave behind the junk. You clean out the closet of your soul. You throw out all the stuff in the attic that's been collecting there. And you carry with you those treasures of remembered relationships that were whole and firm and solid and true. And you give thanks for those because they are precious. Finally, to get through the transitions, you have to believe and believe firmly that God is in the business of redeeming this world. Regardless of what it says on the news, regardless of how dire they say things are, regardless of everything that's going on in the world, regardless of the ways we've defaced the earth, regardless of the things we've done to one another, regardless of the things that's said by one political party or another, regardless of anything, you have to believe that God is in the business of redeeming this world. Don't you see that's what got the disciples through? Jesus ascended into heaven and left them in a pagan world. A world that didn't understand that gospel, a world that was rejecting that gospel that they had to preach, a world that didn't want to have anything to do with it. And they went out one after the other, and they told the stories and taught the things that Jesus had taught them, and they convinced people of what God was doing in and through Jesus, and the world changed because they believed. And because they believed it, they began to live it. These men who were just like you and I, humble and incapable of doing those things, did things that made all the difference in the world because they believed in what God was doing. Look at Paul. Look at Paul. Trying to take care of these little fledgling churches that no one seemed to be paying much attention to. Paul being run out of town, stoned, put in prison, sitting on the floor of some dark, dank prison, singing psalms not because he was defeated, but because he knew what God was going to do in and through this gospel that he was preaching. It's a powerful thing. And once you get hold of what God is doing, once you begin to see it, it does change your life. And it pulls you through every transition you have to make. Because you see, it's the transitions you have to memorize, word for word. Because they get you from one part to the other. The transition that you are a child of God. And then through this sojourn that you have on this earth, you're packing with you the good things, leaving behind the junk. Because you believe and can see that God is indeed redeeming the world in which we live. There's a marvelous little hymn. We're going to use it for our closing hymn, but I want to read it to you first. Hymn number 707, Hymn of Promise. It was written by a woman by the name of Natalie Sleeth. 707 in your hymnal, if you want to follow along as I read it. Natalie was writing this, or wrote this, just after her husband died of cancer. She was writing it in the midst of a very difficult transition in her own life. This is what she says. In the bulb there is a flower. In the seed, an apple tree. In cocoons, a hidden promise. Butterflies will soon be free. In the cold and snow of winter, there's a spring that waits to be. Unrevealed until its season, something God alone can see. There's a song in every silence, seeking word and melody. There's a dawn in every darkness, bringing hope to you and me. From the past will come the future, what it holds a mystery. Unrevealed until its season, something God alone can see. In our end is our beginning. In our time, infinity. In our doubt, there is believing. In our life, eternity. In our death, a resurrection. At the last, a victory. Unrevealed until its season. Something God alone can see. Stand as we sing it together.